My name is Alara. I'm 32 years old, and I live alone in a small apartment in Portland, Oregon, where the persistent rain often feels like a fitting soundtrack to my life. My work is in the earth. I'm a landscape architect, spending my days designing gardens and green spaces for others, creating harmony from soil and stone. This year, for my birthday, I decided to do something I hadn't done in a decade. I decided to believe in my family again. It wasn't a grand gesture of hope, but a quiet, fragile one. I didn't want a party, not really. What I wanted was to feel, just for an evening, that I was a part of something, that the threads connecting me to my mother, my stepfather, and my two half-siblings hadn't frayed into nothingness. I rented a private room at the Evergreen Conservatory, a beautiful glass house filled with ferns and orchids, where the air smells of damp soil and blooming things. I thought the setting might soften them, might remind them of growth and beauty. I strung up a few delicate fairy lights that glowed like captured fireflies against the broad, dark leaves of the monsteras. On a small table, I placed a few framed photos from a time I could barely remember, a gap-toothed version of me on a tire swing, the four of them clustered together on a beach trip I'd paid for years ago. They were meant to be quiet reminders. I am still here. I was once a part of this. I ordered a small, elegant lavender and honey cake. It sent a gentle perfume in the humid air. I wrote 4 simple cards, each one saying, "Thank you for being in my life. I'm so glad we could celebrate together." I sent the invitations weeks in advance. My mother, Serafina. My stepfather, Arthur. My sister, Chloe, and my brother, Leo. All confirmed. That evening, the rain pattered a soft, steady rhythm against the glass roof of the conservatory. I arrived early, taking a seat at a small wrought iron table near a sprawling bird of paradise. The light from the lamps was buttery and warm, making the space feel like a sanctuary. 7 p.m. came and went. I checked my phone, but the screen was dark. No messages, no missed calls. Just the reflection of my own expectant face. I told myself that Portland traffic was unpredictable, that they were probably stuck on the bridge, laughing about being late. 8 p.m. The lavender cake sat on its pedestal, a perfect, untouched monument to my optimism. The sealed envelopes of the cards felt heavy in my purse. I sipped my water, tracing the condensation on the glass with my fingertip, trying my best to look absorbed in the lush greenery around me, as if I were there for the plants, not for the people who weren't. The man who ran the conservatory, a kind, older gentleman with dirt under his fingernails, brought me a cup of chamomile tea on the house. "They might just be running on their own time," he offered, his voice a low rumble. I managed a smile that felt like cracking porcelain and nodded. But that smile disintegrated when the clock on the wall, a beautiful, old regulator, chimed 9 times. No one was coming. The truth settled not like a storm, but like a slow, seeping cold. I took the silver cake server and cut a single, slender slice. I arranged it on a plate, took a picture with my phone, and pretended to post it online with a cheerful caption I never wrote. I ate the cake in a profound silence. Each bite was sweet, fragrant, and tasted of absolute loneliness. I ate it because leaving it whole felt like a confession of my own abandonment. My gaze drifted past the glowing lights, past my own reflection in the dark glass, to the undeniable emptiness of the room. At 10, I gathered my things. I left the rest of the cake for the conservatory staff, along with a generous tip. I walked out into the misty Portland night, the damp air clinging to my skin. My apartment was just as I had left it, silent, still, a container for my solitude. The only sounds were the soft click of my shoes on the hardwood floor and the slow, heavy beat of my own heart. Lying in bed that night, I stared at the shadowed ceiling, a hollow space carved out in my chest. It wasn't their absence that was the deepest wound. It was the stubborn, foolish resilience of my own hope. A week passed. I submerged myself in work, in blueprints and soil acidity charts, in the quiet, predictable life I had built. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone chimed with a notification. It was an email from my mother, Serafina. The subject line read, "Family Celebration." My heart gave a foolish little leap before I read the contents. "Dearest family," it began, her tone as breezy as a summer day. Exciting news! Arthur's 60th birthday is just around the corner, and we're planning a weekend getaway to celebrate him in style at the Blackwood Cove Resort on the coast. It's going to be a truly special event. The cost per person for the weekend package is $1,450. Please transfer the funds to my account by the end of the day Friday so I can secure our booking. Can't wait to celebrate with you all. Love, Mom. I read it once, then twice, a third time. There was no apology for my birthday. No acknowledgement of the empty conservatory. Not even a "how are you?" It was just a bill, wrapped in the guise of family affection. An invoice for an event I was expected to finance, but not truly be a part of. A moment later, a reply all from Chloe pinged. Sent. So excited for this, Mom. Arthur deserves it. Then Leo, all paid up. It's going to be epic. Can't wait to see everyone. I sat at my desk, my fingers resting on the keyboard, and I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger, not the hot, roaring kind. It was a cold, quiet relief. The kind you feel when a long-dreaded diagnosis is finally confirmed. There was nothing left to wonder about. Nothing left to hope for. Nothing left to preserve. I opened my banking app. I typed in my mother's account details. And with a strange, newfound lightness in my chest, I transferred exactly $1.32. In the memo line, I wrote, "Happy birthday. $1 for every year of my life." Then I began to prune. I opened my contacts and, one by one, blocked their numbers. Serafina, Arthur, Chloe, Leo. Each tap of the screen felt like snipping a wire, releasing a tension I hadn't realized I'd been holding for my entire adult life. I gave them no explanation. They hadn't earned one. That night, for the first time in years, I locked my front door's deadbolt. I went through every shared online account, streaming services, old photo clouds, and methodically changed the passwords. I sat on my sofa, the city lights twinkling outside my window, and I exhaled. It felt like the first real breath I had taken in a very, very long time. The quiet that followed was a strange and unfamiliar landscape. For 2 days, there was only the sound of the rain and the hum of my own life. I knew it wouldn't last. My mother, Serafina, does not handle silence well. To her, being ignored is not a boundary, it's a challenge. The first tremor came on Thursday afternoon. I was at a local nursery, selecting Japanese maples for a client's garden design, when my phone buzzed with an alert from my credit union. Suspicious login attempt from an unrecognized device. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. I opened the banking app, my fingers suddenly clumsy. It was the old joint savings account, an account I'd kept open out of a misguided sense of duty. It was the account I'd used to pay for Leo's last 2 years of university, the down payment on Chloe's first car, and the extensive medical bills from the time Serafina insisted she needed a series of alternative therapies that insurance wouldn't cover. I walked out of the nursery, leaving my cart of saplings behind, and called the credit union immediately. My voice, when I spoke, was as steady and hard as river stone. Freeze that account. Effective immediately. I need you to transfer the entire remaining balance into my personal checking account and close the joint account permanently. And I want to change all my security questions and enable 2-factor authentication on everything. There was no tremor of hesitation. The woman on the other end was efficient and asked no questions. The invisible armor I had been building for the past week was holding firm. That evening, the calls started. Unknown numbers, one after another. I let them all go to voicemail. Then came the texts, a barrage of them from numbers I didn't recognize, but whose tone was achingly familiar. Alara, what the hell is going on? Why did you change the locks on the photo account? Call me right now. You froze the account. Arthur and I needed that. What is wrong with you? This is childish. You can't just cut off your entire family. I powered off my phone. I drew a bath, filled it with lavender and Epsom salts, and sank into the hot water, letting the silence of my apartment envelop me. I had underestimated, however, my mother's talent for narrative warfare. When she couldn't control the situation, she would simply rewrite the story, casting herself as the tragic, bewildered victim. It was Friday night. A storm was rolling in off the Pacific, and I was curled on my sofa with a blanket and a classic film, feeling a fragile sense of peace. Then a sharp, insistent ringing of my doorbell echoed through the apartment. It wasn't a friendly rap, it was official and loud. Peeking at the security camera feed on my phone, I saw two uniformed police officers standing on my welcome mat, their slickers dark with rain. One was older, his face etched with a kind of weary patience. The other was younger, looking earnest and a little unsure. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I took a slow, calming breath before opening the door, leaving the chain lock in place. "Can I help you?" The older officer met my gaze. "Are you Alara Vance?" "I am." "Ma'am, we received a call from your family. They filed a wellness check. They said they haven't been able to reach you and are concerned you might be in a state of mental distress, possibly a danger to yourself." I stared at him, the words echoing in the small space between us. Mental distress. Danger to yourself. It was so audacious, so perfectly Serafina, that I almost laughed. A cold wave of disbelief washed over me. "I'm missing," I said, my voice flat. "Officers, I'm perfectly fine. I've simply chosen to cease contact with some family members for personal reasons. I've been at work all week. I'm not a danger to anyone, least of all myself." The younger officer looked me over, his expression softening with a hint of skepticism, directed not at me, but at the report he held. "Is there anyone who can verify that you're safe and sound, ma'am?" "A friend, a coworker." "Better than that," I said. I unhooked the chain, stepped back, and gestured toward my laptop, which was open on the coffee table. I pulled up my work email and a recent project file, a complex, multi-layered design for a public park, complete with botanical names and irrigation schematics. "This is the project I've been working on for the past 48 hours. My lead contractor, my clients, my assistant, they've all been in contact with me daily. I can give you their numbers if you'd like." The older officer's eyes flickered to the screen, then back to my face. He nodded slowly, a silent acknowledgement of the situation's true nature. "Your family expressed a great deal of concern," he said, his tone now carefully neutral. A small, dry smile touched my lips. "Their concern is a recent development. It manifested shortly after I blocked their numbers, changed the locks, and prevented them from accessing my bank account. You see, they didn't get a wellness check when they all forgot my 32nd birthday last week, but they did after I refused to pay for my stepfather's $6,000 vacation." A beat of silence. The officers exchanged a look. "We don't get involved in family disputes, Miss Vance," the older one said finally, his voice gentle. "But it sounds like you're being harassed. If this continues, you may want to consider a restraining order." "I will," I said, my voice firm. "Thank you for your time." They tipped their hats and left without another word. As their footsteps faded down the hall, I closed the door and leaned against it, the wood cool against my back. My own family had weaponized concern, turning it into a tool of intrusion. They hadn't called the police because they feared I was hurt. They called because they had lost their key to my life, and they were trying to have the authorities break down the door for them. I picked up my phone and turned it back on. A new wave of messages had already come through from more unknown numbers. "Alara, the police were there. I know you're home. Open the door. This has gone far enough." Arthur is beside himself with worry. "We all are." I didn't reply. I was no longer the girl who would rush to answer their call, to soothe their manufactured anxieties. I had built a wall, and for the first time, I was the one holding the key. The pounding on my door began at noon on Saturday. It wasn't the measured knock of the police. This was a frantic, angry drumming that vibrated through the wood. I was in my kitchen, brewing a pot of tea, the scent of Earl Grey and bergamot filling the air. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but I knew this was a confrontation that had to be met, not hidden from. I walked to the door and checked the security camera. It was them. My mother, Serafina, stood in front, her face a mask of pinched fury. Beside her, my stepfather, Arthur, had his arms crossed, his posture radiating indignant disapproval. And behind them, my sister, Chloe, was tapping furiously on her phone, her expression a familiar mix of boredom and contempt. I had no doubt she was documenting the entire event for her own dramatic retelling later. I let them stand there for a full minute, a silent assertion of my control over this space. Then, I pressed the button for the intercom. "What do you want?" My voice was calm, projected through the small speaker. "Alara, open this door this instant." Serafina's voice was sharp, accustomed to immediate obedience. "We need to talk." "We have nothing to talk about," I replied, my tone even. Arthur's voice, thick with reproach, cut in. "Don't be a child, Alara. We're your family. We're worried sick, and you're acting like a cornered animal." A dry, mirthless laugh escaped me. "Worried? Is that what you call sending the police to my home with a fabricated story about me being mentally unstable? That's an interesting definition of concern." Chloe finally looked up from her phone. "Oh, get over yourself," she scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. "You ignore our calls for a week, and we're supposed to what, just assume you're fine? You're the one who started this." I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and unlocked the door. I opened it only partway, bracing it with my body, making it clear they were not welcome inside. I looked at the three of them, my family, standing in the hallway like strangers. "What do you want?" I asked again, this time to their faces, the coldness in my voice undisguised. Serafina's expression shifted from anger to theatrical sorrow. Her eyes welled up. "I don't understand what's happened to you, Alara. We're family. You're treating me like an enemy. I don't even recognize my own daughter." "Maybe you never really saw me in the first place," I said softly. "You saw a resource. A safety net. A solution. Do you know what hurt more than you forgetting my birthday? It was the realization, in that single email, that I only seem to register on your radar when a bill is due." Arthur stepped forward, his face flushing. "We raised you. We gave you a roof over your head, we fed you, we clothed you. And this is the thanks we get? You tear this family apart over one missed party." A strange, quiet lucidity settled over me. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not a father figure, but a man clinging to a title he'd never earned. "Raised me? Arthur, I got my first job at 15 to pay for my own school trips, because you said money was tight. I earned a full scholarship to college. I paid for my own car, my own apartment, my own life, from the moment I was legally able. What did you give me that you weren't legally obligated to provide a minor under your roof?" I paused, letting the question hang in the air. "This isn't about a party. This is about a pattern. A decade-long pattern of me giving and all of you taking." Serafina's tears vanished, replaced by a flash of fury. "And what about everything I sacrificed? The sleepless nights? The holidays I put on credit cards to give you kids a nice Christmas? You think that was nothing?" My voice sharpened, each word honed by years of swallowed resentment. "The Christmas you're talking about, Mom? I paid off that credit card bill for you the following February. Just like I paid the nearly $40,000 for Chloe's bohemian chic wedding that she and her husband couldn't afford. The wedding I was a guest at, not even a bridesmaid. Just like I paid for Leo's tuition, so he could get a degree he's not even using. Every time I had a win, a promotion, a successful project, your first call wasn't congratulations, it was Alara, we're in a bit of a bind." Chloe sneered. "You always have to play the martyr, don't you? It must be so hard, having money. You act like you're the only one who's ever struggled." "You're right," I said, my eyes locking onto hers. "I'm not the only one who struggled. But I am the only one who was expected to solve everyone else's struggles while being told my own were dramatic. I was the family emergency fund, but when I had an emergency, I had to handle it myself." Arthur tried to smooth things over, his voice placating. "Look, we just want things to go back to the way they were. This is all just a big misunderstanding." I shook my head, my grip tightening on the edge of the door. "No, it's not a misunderstanding. It's a clarification. For the first time, I am seeing things with absolute clarity. And I am done. I am done being your bank, your therapist, and your scapegoat." My mother's face hardened into a mask of pure rage. "Fine," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You want to be alone? Be alone. But don't you come crawling back to us when you've got nobody left." I met her gaze without flinching and delivered the final, quiet truth. If my choice is between being used and being alone, I will choose alone every single time. She opened her mouth to say more, but Arthur put a hand on her arm, pulling her back. Chloe shot me one last glare of pure poison before turning on her heel. I watched them walk away, their shoulders stiff with indignation. Then I closed the door. Not with a slam, but with a quiet, decisive click. The sound was firm, final. Like closing the cover of a book whose story I already knew by heart, a story I had no desire to ever read again. The silence that filled my apartment in their wake wasn't empty. It was vast. It was clean. It was mine. 2 days after the confrontation, just as a fragile sense of peace began to settle in my apartment, I received an email from my credit union. It was a standard notification, but the content made my blood run cold. A formal inquiry had been made against a property for which I was a co-borrower, a request to refinance the mortgage on the house in the Willamette Valley. The house my mother and Arthur lived in. 6 years ago, Serafina had called me late one night, her voice thick with manufactured panic and tears. They were on the verge of losing the house, she'd claimed, their credit was shot, and the bank was foreclosing. I was 26, just starting to find my financial footing, but the image she painted of them being homeless was more than I could bear. I agreed to co-sign the mortgage. It was a lifeline I'd thrown, thinking I was saving my family. I never imagined they would one day try to use that lifeline to hang me. Refinancing without my consent wasn't just disrespectful, it was a calculated attempt to leverage my credit for more debt, further entangling me in their financial chaos. I sat staring at the screen, the quiet hum of my laptop filling the room. The shock quickly subsided, replaced by a cold, clear-eyed resolve. I called my lawyer, Ms. Albright, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her late 50s who had helped me navigate contracts in the past. "Gretchen," I said, my voice devoid of emotion, "it's Lara Vance. My family is attempting to refinance the house we co-own in the valley without my knowledge or consent. I want it stopped. Now." "Consider it done," she replied, her voice crisp. "Send me a copy of the original mortgage agreement, the deed, and any correspondence you have. I'll have a legal block on any transactions tied to your name by the end of the day." But blocking the refinance wasn't enough. This wasn't about defense anymore. It was about extrication. I opened a new document and began to draft an email to my accountant. The subject line was simple: request for full audit of familial financial support, 2016 to 2022. For the next hour, I dredged up the ghosts of payments past, my fingers flying across the keyboard. It was a painful archaeology of my own generosity. Initial down payment assistance for the Willamette Valley house, $55,000. Loan for Arthur's new work truck after he totaled the old one, $22,000. Covering Chloe's accumulated credit card debt before her wedding, $34,500. Leo's final 2 years of tuition and living expenses, $48,000. Emergency funds for Serafina's various unexplained financial crises over 6 years, an estimated, conservative $60,000. The list went on. Small loans never repaid, bills I'd covered, vacations I'd financed. I asked my accountant to create a meticulously detailed spreadsheet, itemizing every transfer, with dates, amounts, and transaction records attached as proof. I didn't want to fight. I wanted a ledger. I wanted the undeniable, black-and-white truth of our relationship. 3 days later, the audit arrived in my inbox. I opened the file, my hand trembling slightly as I scrolled. The final number at the bottom of the page stared back at me, $219,500. I looked at that number, and I didn't see money. I saw years of my life. I saw my sacrificed vacations, the investment portfolio I'd delayed starting, the quiet anxieties I'd shouldered alone while I was propping up their lives. It was the price tag of my own manufactured obligation. I attached the spreadsheet to a new email, addressed to Serafina, Arthur, Chloe, and Leo. The body of the message contained just 5 words. I want it all back. The explosion was instantaneous. My phone, which had been blissfully silent, lit up like a firestorm. A call from Serafina, which I ignored. A string of texts from Chloe. "Are you actually insane? This is a joke, right? You don't put a price on family. Then Leo, Alara, I'm working 2 jobs just to pay my rent. You want me to what, sell a kidney? And finally, a cold, clipped email from Arthur. You have finally done it. You've destroyed this family. Your mother hasn't eaten or slept. I hope you're proud of yourself. I read them all, and I felt nothing but a profound, weary confirmation that I had done the right thing. I forwarded the entire chain of messages to Gretchen Albright with a new directive. I want to initiate a partition action. Force a sale of the house. I want my equity, and I want to be bought out of my share of the debt. Gretchen called me within 10 minutes. Are you certain, Alara? This is the point of no return. A forced sale will mean the house goes on the market, whether they like it or not. They'll be forced to move. I looked at the audit again, at the 6-figure sum that represented my silent servitude. I'm not forcing them to move, Gretchen, I said, my voice steady. Their own choices led them here. I'm just collecting on a debt that's long overdue. That same afternoon, Gretchen's office sent a formal letter of intent via certified mail. It stated, in unambiguous legal terms, that Alara Vance was exercising her right to force the sale of the jointly owned property at 417 Vineyard Lane to recoup her financial investment. They had 14 days to respond with a settlement offer, or the proceedings would begin. Their response came not through a lawyer, but through a new wave of emotional manipulation. A text from Chloe arrived first. You're really going to make Mom and Arthur homeless? Right before the holidays? You're not just cold, you're a monster. I read it, deleted it, and felt a strange sense of detachment. They called me a monster for building a boundary, but never saw the monstrosity in devouring someone else's life to sustain their own. That night, an email from Serafina landed in my inbox. It was the one I had been subconsciously dreading. Alara, if you do this, we will lose everything. Arthur and I will have nowhere to go. After everything I have done for you, is this how you repay me? By throwing your own mother out onto the street? Don't you have a heart? Mom. I set my phone down. I walked to my window and looked out at the lights of Portland twinkling in the damp darkness. I didn't feel heartless. I felt clear. For the first time, the word mom didn't trigger an automatic pang of guilt or obligation. It was just a word on a screen. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that if I backed down now, I would be lost forever, drowned in an ocean of their making. I did not reply. A week of profound silence followed the legal notice. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was heavy, tactical, the kind of quiet that precedes a desperate, final move. And then it came. On a Monday afternoon, an email from Gretchen landed in my inbox. Alara, they've agreed to sell the house. They're listing it immediately. However, they are petitioning to handle the sale privately to avoid realtor fees and are being evasive about the timeline for repaying your portion from the proceeds. I suspect they're going to try to delay. My reply was brief. Stay on them, Gretchen. Tightly. 3 days later, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number from Florida. It was my Aunt Amelia, my mother's older sister, a woman I hadn't spoken to in years. Her voice was hesitant, laced with a carefully constructed neutrality. Alara, honey. It's your Aunt Amelia. Your mother called me. She was hysterical. Crying. She said you were forcing them out of their home, demanding hundreds of thousands of dollars. I know there are 2 sides to every story, but is it true? I leaned back in my chair, the predictable narrative web-catching even relatives a continent away. I felt a surge of exhaustion, the sheer weariness of having to defend my own sanity. I chose not to. Aunt Amelia, I said, my voice calm and even. I am not demanding anything. I am collecting what is owed. Every dollar I have asked for is a dollar I gave them. They can sell the house. They can sell the truck I paid for. They can sell the jewelry I bought them. It's not revenge. It's restitution. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Oh, she said finally, the single word carrying a universe of dawning understanding. I see. We spoke for a few more minutes, but the conversation was over. She had heard the side of the story that didn't require dramatic embellishment. 2 weeks later, the house was on the market. The online listing showed pictures of the sun-drenched living room where we'd once had a tense Christmas, the back deck overlooking the valley where Arthur used to hold court during summer barbecues. It was listed aggressively, priced to sell fast. Looking at the photos, I felt a surprising and complete lack of emotion. It was just a property. Its power over me was gone. The liquidation began. Arthur's Ford F-150, the one he'd claimed was essential for his contracting work I later learned he'd lost, appeared on Facebook Marketplace. Serafina's jewelry, including a diamond pendant I had bought her for her 50th birthday, was sold to a local consignment shop. Gretchen received photos from their lawyer as proof of their efforts to raise funds. The first wire transfer was for $15,000. A week later, another $8,000 trickled in. They were paying me back in pieces, a slow bleed. Gretchen sent another formal letter, warning that if the full balance of my equity from the house sale wasn't paid within 48 hours of closing, she would file for a court-ordered seizure of the funds. There would be no more games. The day the house sale closed, the remaining balance appeared in my account. The full sum. I stared at the number on my screen, the finality of it settling in my chest. It wasn't a victory. It was a conclusion. A few days later, I got the final update from Gretchen. The house was empty. Serafina and Arthur had vacated the property. She'd heard through the grapevine that Serafina's credit was too low to qualify for even a modest apartment rental. Arthur, it turned out, had been unemployed for months, a fact he'd hidden from everyone, including my mother. Chloe and Leo, now both living with their respective partners, had apparently made it clear they had no room for their parents. The whispers suggested Serafina and Arthur were now living in an old, run-down RV that Arthur had bought years ago with a vague plan to see the country. It was parked in a long-term lot on the outskirts of the city. Their grand coastal resort vacation had been replaced by a cramped, cold metal box. That evening, a text came through from a number I didn't have blocked because I'd never had it in the first place. It was from Chloe. "Are you happy now? They're living in a trailer park. Mom is using a public shower. Is this the justice you wanted?" I looked at the message for a long time. The old Alara would have been shattered by guilt. But the woman reading that text felt a quiet, sad clarity. It was the same voice, the same tactic, a family that only invoked my name when they needed a savior. I did not respond. I was no longer on call for their rescues. I put on my coat and walked down to the Willamette River. The December air was crisp and cold. I stood on the Tillicum Crossing Bridge, watching the city lights shimmer on the dark water, and felt a feeling I couldn't remember ever having before. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't satisfaction. It was peace. A vast, quiet, and unburdened peace. It was the feeling of being free. For months dissolved into the soft green of a Portland spring. The silence in my life had become a comfortable presence, like an old friend. The phantom limb of my family's constant need had stopped aching. Life was quiet, measured, and for the first time, entirely my own. One drizzly Friday evening, a colleague invited me to a pottery class. I usually shied away from group activities, still protective of my newfound solitude, but something in me said yes. Perhaps I was curious to see who I was now, in a room full of strangers, with no role to play. The studio was warm and smelled of damp clay and hot kills. I sat at a wheel, the instructor's voice a low murmur in the background as she explained the basics of centering the clay. I pushed the pedal and the lump of earth began to spin beneath my hands. There was something meditative about it, the focus required, the gentle pressure needed to shape something from a formless mass. I was lost in the rhythm of it when I glanced across the room. A man was struggling at his own wheel, his shoulders slumped in frustration as his clay collapsed into a lopsided mound. There was something familiar in his posture, in the weary set of his jaw. As he wiped his clay-splattered hands on his apron, he looked up, and his eyes met mine across the room. The world seemed to slow for a beat. It was Arthur. He looked older, thinner. The arrogant confidence he used to wear like a well-tailored suit was gone, replaced by something frayed and tired. My first instinct was to stand up and walk out, to retreat back into the safety of my quiet life. But I didn't. I held his gaze, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to run. He rose slowly and walked over to my table, his movements hesitant. Elara, he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its former bluster. I didn't smile. I just nodded, my hands still resting on my own centered piece of clay. I didn't expect to see you here, he said, gesturing vaguely at the room. Serafina's sister thought a new hobby might be good for me. I said nothing, just continued to let the wheel spin slowly under my palms. He stood there for a long, awkward moment before pulling up a stool and sitting near my table, not quite beside me. The silence between us was vast, filled with the ghosts of shouted words and unspoken resentments. I'm not very good at this, he said finally, a small, self-deprecating laugh escaping him. He looked down at his clay-caked hands. Turns out it's harder to build something than it is to just take it. I stopped the wheel and turned to look at him properly. The harsh studio lights carved new lines into his face. Elara, he began again, his voice dropping so low I had to lean in to hear it. I know it doesn't mean much now, but I wanted to say, I'm sorry. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I didn't come here to ask for anything. The old me would have. But that man, he lost everything. He took a shaky breath. I was supposed to be the man of the house, the provider. But you were better at it than I ever was. You were successful, you were smart, you were independent. And it made me feel small. It made me feel weak. So I let your mother lean on you. I encouraged it. It was easier than admitting I was failing. Using the idea of family was a way to hold on to a sense of control that I never really had. I listened, my expression unreadable. You didn't just take money, Arthur, I said, my voice low but steady. You took my 20s. You took my trust. You taught my brother and sister that I was not their sister, but a resource to be tapped. You enabled a cycle of dependency that has left everyone broken. He finally looked at me, and in his eyes I saw not malice, but a profound and hollow regret. I know. No apology can fix a single bit of it. But I am sorry I never stood up for you. I'm sorry I never once told you that I was proud of you. Because I was. We all were. We were just too buried in our own need to ever say it. They were words I had yearned to hear for my entire life. And now, hearing them, I felt a quiet sadness, but not a pull towards reconciliation. I'm not coming back, you know, I said, the words gentle but firm. This isn't the beginning of a repair. I can't go back to that. I just want to live my life now, without the weight of everyone else's expectations. He nodded slowly, as if he'd expected this. I know, he said. He stood up and, for a moment, he looked like he might try to hug me or touch my arm. Instead, he just extended a clay-stained hand. I looked at it for a moment. Then, slowly, I reached out and shook it. His hand was cool and rough. Mine was steady. It was a handshake between two separate people, two adults, finally on equal ground. I have to get going, I said, standing and straightening my shirt. Enjoy your class, Arthur. He nodded, not asking me to stay. You too, Elara. Outside, the cool night air felt clean against my skin. I got into my car and sat for a long moment in the darkness, the sounds of the city a distant hum. I drove home, the streetlights sliding across my windshield like memories being wiped clean. There were no frantic missed calls on my phone. No guilt-laden texts waiting for me. There was just me, and a silence that finally felt like peace, not emptiness. When I got to my apartment, I opened the window wide. The air smelled of rain and blooming magnolias from the courtyard below. I didn't think about the past or the money or the anger. I thought about the feeling of the clay on the wheel, the potential to take something broken or formless and shape it into something whole. I had once thought that forcing them to repay me was an act of revenge. But it wasn't. It was an act of liberation. I had not been fighting for victory. I had been fighting for an escape. An escape from the role of the good daughter, the silent provider, the emotional bedrock for a family that gave nothing in return. I opened my laptop and booked a flight. A one-way ticket to Kyoto, a place of ancient gardens and quiet temples. I wasn't running away. I was running toward myself. To a place where I wasn't anyone's daughter or sister or cosigner. I was just Elara. The next morning, I woke with the sun. I walked through a park near my home, a space I had helped design years ago. I watched a young couple laughing on a bench, a child chasing pigeons, an old man reading a newspaper. No one knew my story. No one needed anything from me. This, I realized, was not nothingness. It was freedom. I don't know what the future holds. Perhaps one day, a letter will arrive from my mother, filled with words I can finally believe. Perhaps not. But I know this for certain. I am no longer a support structure for someone else's garden. I am finally tending to my own. My roots are mine, my growth is mine, and my peace is absolute. And I will not give it up for anything.